For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. Hi, I'm Surya Gangadharan and welcome to another edition of the Gist. Our guest for this evening is Sushant Sareen. He really needs no introduction. He's been on our show before. Sushant, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Our focus this evening is on the Delhi Declaration issued by the meeting of National Security Advisors of India, Russia, Iran, and the 5 Central Asian states. I'd like to play the graphic first. The declaration is a few points. We picked up the main, most important points in order of. So there you have it. Warned against Afghan territory being used for terrorist activities. Afghanistan must not be a safe haven for terrorism. Cooperative measures against radicalization, and so on. Inclusive government in Afghanistan. And the last point, humanitarian assistance for all in Afghanistan. So those are the main points that was issued at the end of the deliberations in Delhi today. Fairly standard. We've known of this. These points have come up before in earlier meetings, not necessarily at the NSA level, but also in meeting of diplomats and others. So, Shant, your impressions?
So yeah, you're right. I think it is fairly standard. All this stuff about suffering in Afghanistan, humanitarian assistance, that Afghanistan should not become a center for terrorism. All of this is stuff that we've been hearing of for the longest. I think from the Indian point of view, the only really significant thing out of this declaration is the first point, which is that reiterated strong support for a peaceful, secure, and stable Afghanistan, while emphasizing the respect for sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity, and non-interference in its internal affairs. So basically, what India is saying is that unlike in the 1990s, when we were all, or what we are signing on, I'm not saying that we are saying it, but that's what we seem to be signing on. And this is a kind of an olive branch we seem to be holding out that, we accept that the Taliban is a reality. We might have to hold our noses and accept that reality, but we accept it. We are not going to do anything to, in a sense, destabilize this regime. We are not going to do anything to support people, or interfere in any which way in Afghan internal affairs. So I think that's a kind of an olive branch that is being extended to whosoever will take it. And that kind of completely changes the complexion from what our policy traditionally towards the Taliban has been, which is that we will not accept them and we will support whoever stands up against them. But I suspect that there is a certain amount of diplomacies in this as well. But to my mind, I'm looking at this declaration from two standpoints. One, this overture which is being made, and in exchange of this overture, there are certain expectations from the Taliban regime that you allow humanitarian assistance to go. There is no talk of recognition or any of this other stuff out there in this declaration. But the concerns which all these 8 countries have been put on paper. I think that has been said. They've said that we are ready to extend humanitarian assistance, but don't interfere. We will try and do it. Don't expect us to go through you. I don't know how that is going to work because, again, there's nothing novel in this demand. This is something everybody around the world has been demanding. In fact, the United Nations resolutions also said the same thing. So all of that is standard. Pardon. Except that first clause, which I think is, from my standpoint, I think is fairly significant.
So you would say that all 8 countries are on board with this declaration, and this is their common stand. This is what they're going to do when they, deal with Afghanistan going forward.
This is what this is a declaration that all 8 countries have signed on. What they will do is completely different. It does not, don't draw a 1:1 causation, right?
Yeah.
This is what they've signed on. Okay, this is the nice face that everybody's showing to
Yeah.
everybody else. But look, let's face it, the concerns of all these 8 countries, and I'm very glad that the Pakistanis behaved in the petulant matter that they did. That NSA of theirs is, frankly, he's something that the cat would have brought in anyways. He's a suited booted bigot anyways. So frankly, I don't. Good, Pakistanis deserve him, and United States Institute of Peace deserves him. We don't. I'm glad that he hasn't come, and it's good that the Chinese have not come, because I think the 8 countries which were present today in New Delhi, to my mind, have similar concerns as far as the Taliban regime is concerned. Uh, so while we have similar concerns, we are not necessarily, our approach towards the Taliban regime is not necessarily the same. We see some of the countries, in a manner of speaking, racing ahead to try and explore possibilities of engagement with the Taliban, some kind of accommodation with the Taliban. Others are lagging behind. The interests of many of these countries are different. So, for example, the Iranian interest is not the same as the Indian interest, is not the same as what the Tajiks or the Uzbeks want or what the Russians want. The Kyrgyz and the Kazakhs are in any case a little removed. The Turkmen have vast stretches of land which are unpopulated. So the threat which they perceive from these guys is probably of not the same degree, scale, and level as that of Tajikistan. The Uzbeks seem to be very keen on reaching out to these people. So I think the approaches are different. The threat perceptions are similar, concerns are similar, but the approaches are different. And I think this particular meeting, and I'm sure there will be many more such meetings at different, bilaterals, multilaterals, trilaterals, what have you. I would suspect that there will be a constant effort to try and see where all these countries can cooperate, where all they can come on the same page, and adopt a common approach. But as of now, I wouldn't say that the approach is entirely common between all these 8 countries.
Is
And
there
yet the concerns are the same, which are not the concerns of the Chinese or the Pakistanis.
So, is there an indication or a hint here, perhaps, that they will also be tough with the Taliban where it matters or where it needs to matter? Do you see any indication of that?
Surya, I think that is a little premature at this point in time to imagine whether that is going to be happening. Uh, I think the reason why all these countries are like coming together and talking about this entire, what is likely to come out of Afghanistan is because of those apprehensions which they have. If those apprehensions actually come true, and I suspect many of them will, going forward, because frankly, unless you believe in fairy tales, I don't think this is a changed Taliban or whatever else. So I think many of those apprehensions are likely to come true. The important thing is that many of the countries, unlike the 1990s when they did not even bother to reach out to the Taliban, and very often, Surya, we forget that the Taliban occupied Kabul in September 1996. And the first recognition of the Taliban regime came in May 1997. First by the Pakistanis, then by the Saudis and the Emiratis, within a couple of days of each other. But that was almost 7-8 months later. Right now, we're just 2 months or so, down the line. So I don't think people should, or 3 months, and I don't think people should be rushing into thinking that there is a international consensus. The Pakistanis are desperate to get the Taliban, recognized, and all sorts of aid, and because somebody has to foot the bill out there. ये तो पाकिस्तानियों ने सोचा ही नहीं था. They never think about where the money is going to come from. Now, they always think that the money will come. Allah is benign. Allah will give them money. So they thought that this is what will happen even in Afghanistan. And they never bothered about the economic side of it. And now they're trying to blackmail, just like they try and blackmail in their own country, that we are a nuclear power state, and if we fail, then or what will happen to the world, as though they are very bothered about the world. Similarly with the Pakistanis, with the Afghans, their approach that, listen, if you don't give them money, then there will be terrorism all over the world. So that's their standard game. This is the game, precisely the game they played in the 1990s also. So good that they haven't come. But as far as the other 8 countries are concerned, I think they're all trying to reach out, and they're all trying to feel around and see whether this time around things can be somewhat different. At least some via media can be found out, some modus vivendi can be worked out, whereby their apprehensions are largely addressed, if not entirely. But in case that does not happen, then the kind of conversations which are happening on all these forums will come very handy if there is a pushback against Taliban and other Islamist groups present in Afghanistan, their recalcitrance. If that happens, then I think these conversations will lead to some kind of pushback, which is a kind of a cooperative pushback. Each country is developing their own leverages right now. The Iranians have probably the most lethal leverages over the Taliban, not just within the Taliban movement, but also outside of it. They have their militias and everything else ready. The Tajiks are probably apprehending, their apprehension levels are very, very high right now. And they're very, very wary of what is going to happen. The Uzbeks seem to be a little more relaxed compared to the others. The Kyrgyz and the Kazakhs are in any case very far off. The Russian involvement, the Russian interest is primarily of its soft underbelly, so that if either the Russian terrorists like from Dagestan, Chechens, and some of these other characters, those, and plus the instability or the destabilization of their underbelly, which is Central Asia. So I think that is the Russian interest. The Indian interest is, of course, primarily through the Pakistani based terror groups which take sanctuary in Afghanistan. So I think the apprehensions are similar, and yet you can differentiate between what the threat perceptions of each country. The levels vary when you go from country to country. In case of Iran, the sectarian angle would be much bigger. In case of Tajikistan, it's not so much the sectarian angle as it is the ethnic angle. Yeah. So I think that kind of keeps changing when you go from country to country, but the threat perceptions are similar.
Mm-hmm. Would you say the Taliban has been able to stabilize in the last few months? I mean, I know there is recurrent attacks going on, but what's your sense?
Yeah, it depends on what your definition of stability is. The way I look at it, I'm not so convinced that they have really stabilized, in the sense that, there is no army which is threatening to march on Kabul.
Yeah.
Or there is no military force which is fighting battles against them, even in outlying areas, or trying to capture territory from them. There are some reports of guerrilla action taking place, especially in the Panjshir and some of the other areas up north. There are reports of bubbling resentment in other parts of Afghanistan. But nothing, of the sorts that the Taliban regime is under siege. I don't think that. Now, if that is your definition of stability, yes, they've stabilized.
It's a superficial one.
But when you start looking at the fact that the resentment against this Taliban regime continues to rise, they've not been able to address, the apprehensions of people within Afghanistan, number one. So you are seeing manifestations of that resentment rise. Number two, the economy has completely collapsed.
Yeah.
It might not affect Sirajuddin Haqqani or Anas Haqqani's lifestyle, but every ordinary Afghan on the street, journalist, businessman, shopkeeper, uh, it's devastation all around. Government servants have not got paid. There is no money to give. They don't even have printed notes. Forget everything else. So inflation is going through the roof. So all of those problems are there now. If it's severely destabilized from that angle. Again, from the humanitarian angle, I think they are facing a monumental problems as far as the humanitarian crisis is concerned. I suspect that the Taliban will use because the Pakistanis will put them to it. You have to understand where the Pakistanis come from in this whole thing. But they will try and exploit the humanitarian angle to grab whatever they can from the rest of the world, and hope that this will pull them through. Buy a lot of time for them. So that is one. But I still think that there is going to be further instability as far as that aspect is concerned. Third, on the security front, it's not just these skirmishes or the guerrilla attacks taking place up north by the erstwhile regime or elements, anti-Taliban elements, but also by the ISIS guys. They mounted some pretty devastating attacks, terror attacks right now. There are reports of clashes and hit and run attacks and all sorts of other things, gunfights happening, particularly in eastern parts of Afghanistan and northeastern parts of Afghanistan. So there you do see that particular factor come up fairly strongly. We've seen the attack on that mosque in Kandahar, which means that the ISIS has got, its reach does reach down south, deep down south. And that is hardcore Taliban country, but they have a presence out there as well. So I think there are those issues, and then there is the entire question of the international terror groups that have taken refuge in Afghanistan. How does that play out? Because a lot of the countries, for example, which met in Delhi today, would be extremely concerned about how the Taliban propose to deal with all these international terror groups, which are part and parcel of the cohort which the Taliban had assembled around themselves. So I think all of those factors, when you add them in, I don't think anybody can really say that the situation is stabilizing in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier the leverage that Iran has in Afghanistan in terms of a militia and so on. Could you give us a little more detail about that, and also India's leverages? What are they?
So I think on the Iranian side, their leverages are that, number one, they have a very strong contacts within the Taliban. Many of the Taliban, commanders and leaders from down south, especially Helmand and other areas, even in Herat, many of them had very close connections with the Iranians. And in fact, when the first iteration of the so-called interim government of the Taliban came up, I think there was a lot of anger even within Iran, because many of the commanders who were very close to Iran and who had worked very closely with Iran were kept out under the influence of the Haqqanis. So Haqqanis are basically Punjabi puppets in Afghanistan. They work on whatever the ISI tells them. That is what the Haqqanis do. So the Haqqanis is basically ISI running Afghanistan, and they've captured most of Kabul and that particular area, especially in the east. And there's a lot of resentment down south and in other parts of Afghanistan with what the Haqqanis are trying to do, monopolizing power. But having said that, so one is that factor, and then I think it was partly to assuage the Iranians and partly to try and make make sure that things don't go out of hand. You saw the second round of inductions in the cabinet with people like Ibrahim Sardar and others, these kind of guys coming in. So, so that was one leverage which the Iranians have. The second is you have a very powerful narcotics lobby in down south. Now, again, it kind of gets mixed up with the Taliban because the Taliban was using it to generate money and resources and all sorts of other things. So there was that aspect. But none of that could have happened unless the Iranians also allowed some of it to go through. So there was that angle also which is at play. The third angle which is at play is of the Hazaras. And over the last many years now, during the Syrian civil war, the Iranians had set up two brigades. One was the Fatemiyun Brigade, which comprised primarily of Afghan Shias, and the other was the Zenubian Brigade, which comprised primarily of Pakistani Shias. And this is a fairly effective force, battle hardened kind of a force. So I think there is that leverage which the Iranians have. The third leverage, of course, which they have is that they share a border with these guys. They have very close contacts, not just with the Taliban, but also with the erstwhile elements of the erstwhile regime. From what we are hearing, people like Ismail Khan and all already are taken refuge in Iran, just like they had earlier. And Ismail Khan might be old, but I think he still wields a fair amount of influence. So the Iranians have a lot of influence, and they, unlike the Pakistanis, who clumsily show their hand all the time and would love to, thumb their chest to tell everybody how great and powerful they are. The Iranians work much more silently, and smartly, I must add. So there is that factor. As far as what are the Indian leverages, I don't think too many right now. I think one of the leverages we have is a certain amount of goodwill which we have earned over the last few decades. That we were not involved in any of the conflict out there. We were not taking, we were not doing anything untoward out there like many of the other countries. Most of our developmental work was fairly effective. Things like hospitals, all the soft power elements which we had deployed in Afghanistan is a fair amount of advantage which we enjoy. So, but that is one. But more than that, I think there is this aspect that India is a country which can actually help them economically, not just in terms of markets, but also in terms of aid and developmental work. Thirdly, I think India does have a lot of equities, not just in Iran. And this is not necessarily because, we are on the same page on everything, but because we have common interests. And in parts of Central Asia, where we can use those equities to get, if nothing else, at least listening posts out there, whereby we can maybe use those as kind of bases to help certain people who want to get out of Afghanistan do other stuff if we come down to doing it inside Afghanistan. So I think those are the leverages right now. Of course, they're contingent on many other factors. So I think I would say that it's not as though, we have nothing in hand, but it's a lot of balls which are in play right now. They are up in the air. And so we'll have to see how this thing starts unfolding. But I think there are a lot of options which are going to open going forward. And some of the options the Indian side is creating, with a certain amount of diplomatic finesse. And right at the outset of your show, I said that, when India signs on to this thing that we are going for the stability of Afghanistan and non-interference and stuff like that, I think it's a kind of a message to those guys, and let's see how it is received and where we go from here.
So, in that connection, there's a question from MMA fighter. He's asking, don't you think the Indian intelligentsia, especially the MEA and so on, have phenomenally failed to gauge the situation in Afghanistan?
I blame it only on the Indians, yeah. Nobody actually anticipated that things will unfold the way they did. Were the Americans not? We didn't have the same level of presence that the Americans had.
Yeah.
And the Americans were saying 2 weeks before the fall of Kabul, they were saying that at least the next 6 months, 1 year, maybe even longer, this thing is going to survive. The regime is not going to collapse. Forget the Americans, forget the Indian. The Afghans didn't know when everything folded up, right? We know that. Right? Nobody thought that everything will fold up as fast as it did. Now, look, hindsight is 2020. Yeah. With the benefit of hindsight, and I can say that, listen, I said 2 months before that this thing is going to fall. Yeah, but I said many other things where I was proven wrong. So, this thing which people had, that I said this and I knew this will happen, it's all nonsense here. The fact of the matter remains that a lot of things which happened, nobody really anticipated that this collapse will come as fast as it did. We knew that things were very bad. But look, on the 15th of August, when the Taliban walked in, nobody expected it, right? And the way, province after province was falling like nine pins, you can blame it on, the Indian embassy, the Indian government. Everybody can be really smart about this after the event. But when it was happening, how many people knew that this is how it's going to unfold? I don't think so.
I mean, the fact that we had consulates in Herat and Kandahar and,
No, but listen again. See, two of the consulates we had closed. Herat and Jalalabad we had closed long back.
Yeah.
Right? We had two consulates left. Kandahar we closed when the fighting got too close. And within 2 days of our closing the consulate, Kandahar fell.
Yeah.
Okay. Did we want to risk our diplomatic staff in Kandahar when the Taliban walked in? Because we didn't know what they're going to do with our people. Did you want another Iran hostage crisis kind of a thing? What would you have done? And knowing that the Pakistanis, what happened to that photographer of Reuters or whichever thing he was working for. He was actually dragged out and killed because he was identified by the Pakistanis that he's an Indian spy and kill him. Everybody knew he's a journalist. The Pakistanis knew he's a journalist. They got him killed. Okay? And I'm not making this up. This is what whatever agency this guy was working for, Reuters or whatever. Right? They have come out with that report. And they had taken refuge and they were dragged out of that mosque and killed. Okay? Now, we know that in Kabul, when the Taliban started moving in, it was under the Haqqanis were in charge. We know what the Haqqanis have done to our embassies and establishments in Afghanistan in the past. So to say that just because we had a mission out there that everybody should have known what was happening, I think that's not quite fair. Who expected Mazar-e-Sharif to fall the way it did?
Yeah, absolutely.
Badakhshan had virtually not fallen throughout the 90s. Large swaths of territory in the north. Everybody thought, okay, even if, Kabul and all these areas fall, the north will, be able to resist. The north fell first. South mein to baad mein aaye, wo pehle to they moved it up north, So I think, it's, I wouldn't be that uncharitable. Could we have done things better? Should we have done things better? Yeah, maybe, one can review how things happened. but I think nobody really anticipated what the way it played out.
So, last question, Sushant. At some point, you think we'll have to work with Pakistan and China on Afghanistan? I suppose there is some interaction going on as far as China is concerned. But with Pakistan, do you see that as inevitable at some point?
Like I said, if you believe that the Taliban are a changed entity, then yes, you will be able to work with Pakistan also. It's not going to happen. But look, let's face it, with the Chinese, I can tell you this that at various levels, I don't know whether it was happening at the official level, I'm not privy to that. But even at the official level, if you remember, uh, Mr. Modi and Xi Jinping had come up with this idea that there'll be common uh, projects that India and China will do in Afghanistan, and that was almost 2 or 3 years back.
Yeah.
So, but even much before that, and I can tell you it was at least 10 years back, uh, when the Chinese started approaching Indian think tanks, universities, which were dealing with Afghanistan, to talk about Afghanistan, and they studiously kept the Pakistanis out of it.
Yeah.
They never wanted to get the Pakistanis involved in this. Um, and there was some amount. I have also participated in one or two of those, Um and there was some interaction on how both sides viewed what was happening in Afghanistan. Of course, the Chinese line was completely towing the Pakistani line, that they needed to, it was very important for the stability of Pakistan. But Pakistanis were doing all the instability all over the world, but the Chinese were, giving that spin. So, but that conversation was happening even back then. Nothing came out of it. Nothing would have come out of it because we know where the Chinese come from, what their attitude towards India is. But having said that, maybe we can still have a conversation with the Chinese. With the Pakistanis, I don't think so. See, what do the Pakistanis want? The Pakistanis say that, listen, you Hindus, please give your money through us and we will build Afghanistan. And do you know something? And let me give you this as a shocker. It's not just the Pakistanis. There are Indian origin US congressmen who have proposed this. I swear. I don't want to give you names. I can give you hints if you want, but maybe you can call me up later and I can tell you the name of that guy. And I had given him a dressing down. I don't care whether he's a congressman, senator, president of America. And I told him, how does this work? You want us to fund projects, including some luminaries of the Indian intelligence establishment have also proposed this. People who are authors and others. You can guess. That, our interest is stability of Afghanistan. The Pakis don't like it. So what should India do? India should take out its checkbook and keep cutting checks, preferably give the checks to Pakistan so that Pakistan can build Afghanistan. Paisa main do, and the Pakistanis don't want to be in Afghanistan. Now, if you might as well call the Pakistanis and tell them that, okay, yaar, you might as well put your jhanda on Lal Killa and finish it off. फिर पैसे भी ले जाओ, सब कुछ ले जाओ तुम यहाँ से. Right? If that is policy, yeah, okay, fine. We've done it for 1,000 years. We can do it for another 500. Doesn't matter. But I'm not so sure that in a democracy that will sell very well.
Absolutely.
But so I don't really anticipate any positivity coming from the Pakistani side. And if the Pakistanis, in fact, try and show some positivity, be very, very wary of them, because there is never going to be any good coming from that country. So it is better when they are nasty, because you know that that's their natural self. When they are trying to be friendly, beware. There's something really nasty they're going to do.
On that note, Sushant Sareen, thanks very much for your insight. And we'll continue this conversation, given that Afghanistan is still in the state that it is. Thanks very much, Sushant.
Sure, man. Thanks.
And for all of you out there, thanks for your comments and observations. Glad to have them. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Keep following us on Instagram. Come to our website. Thank you. Good night.